Should your kids go see The Flash? What specific inappropriate content should you be looking out for? Most importantly, what ideas are being introduced and inculcated into our teens when they watch this movie? We're going to jump right into it now. This is Unsafe Media, and my name is Ryan Martin. I help you respond with wisdom and virtue to the ideas of our age. So first, should children go see this movie? The answer is absolutely no. And when I say children, I'm not like a politician pushing gun control. I mean what you mean by children. If you don't know what that reference is, go check out this video after you finish this one. Don't ruin my click-through rate. By children, I mean your kids, your little ones. And no, they should not go see this movie, but I'm not saying that teens shouldn't be able to. The themes of the movie are perfectly appropriate for kids to grapple with and to be introduced to kids, like the loss of family or the need for self-sacrifice. But there's a big difference between teaching a 6-year-old that he needs to be willing to sacrifice for the greater good of the community and him watching Barry Allen ripped to shreds by electricity while screaming in agony. So it's not the themes that are the problem, it's just the tone that's too dark. And then there's a lot of specific content that's definitely inappropriate for kids. There is straight up nudity. There are flashes of Barry Allen's butt. See what I did there? There are several minutes of the film where he's ostensibly naked and there's only a small something or other covering up his family jewels. There's some awkward sex jokes. We see an unmarried couple waking up in bed together, and there's quite a lot of profanity as well. Now, I'm not a Puritan on these issues. I'm not saying that kids can never hear blue language or see a depiction of something that you consider to be immoral, but there's an authority issue. You are the chief authority in your kid's life. And whenever you put something on screen that venerates something you disagree with, then there's this challenge for authority in your kid's mind. And again, kid, I mean little children here. So whenever you say, hey, don't do that, but the cool guy on the screen who is clearly the hero of the story is doing it, then it becomes difficult for your child to suss out which is the right view. But by the time your kid is, say, anywhere from 10 to 17, depending on each kid individually, you've already hopefully begun to really seriously shape his worldview. So the things that he thinks are right or wrong, what he considers to be the rightful use of language, once all that has already been set for him, he's able to go to the movie as a judge of the movie, as opposed to simply being shaped by it. He's able to say to assess for himself whether or not they're using language in an appropriate way, or whether or not the relationships shown on screen are good and true. Now let's talk about the major ideas and how you can use this film to help really build your child's worldview. The first major idea we have to talk about is unintended consequences. This is the most underappreciated topic in our world today. The entirety of leftist politics is essentially confusing the will for the deed, or rather, to put it a different way, confusing the intended outcomes of a policy with the actual outcomes of a policy. Now, again, this is a spoiler-free review, but this is straight up from the trailer. Barry goes back in time in order to prevent a major act of evil, and he's warned ahead of time that this could have world-breaking implications. And of course, that's exactly what ends up happening. With the best of intentions, he ends up unleashing far more evil on the world than he actually prevented. And what this calls for is for us to mingle with our compassion wisdom. So take something like minimum wage laws or price ceilings on housing. These are always passed with the best of intentions to help those with the least skill and the least amount of money and the worst education in order to help them get ahead in life. But instead, what it ends up doing is putting millions of them out of work, creating housing shortages, and actually making their lot in life significantly worse. So we have to help our kids understand the tragic reality that we find ourselves in, that the best of intentions don't always result in the best outcomes, and that there really are no solutions to the problems of pain and suffering in the world. Rather, there's always trade-offs, and you have to be carefully constraining your decisions to what will result in the most amount of good with the least amount of evil. The second major philosophical idea that arises is this idea of destiny or fate. In the movie, I can't remember the exact phrase they use, something like a fixed moment in time. Basically, there are certain events that you can't overcome, that they're going to occur no matter what. And this, of course, immediately brings into view something like destiny or fate, or really providence. That's the real idea here. If there is any such thing as a fixed moment in time, then you have to have an entity like God. But why is that? Because this would reflect something like a decision. There is some choice that this moment will always occur no matter what. So this would require an entity, an existing thing beyond time and space that would make these sorts of decisions. But a force, an impersonal force, doesn't make decisions. It doesn't make determinations. Therefore, you would need a personal mind, a mind beyond time and space itself. And now we're just talking about God. Now that leads us immediately to our third major idea, which is the problem of evil. Why would, if there is such an entity, why would this entity allow suffering or pain at all. And here I think that the movie actually grapples with that really well. First, suffering is an inevitable consequence of having more than one autonomous will. The instant that there are two entities that have desires, anytime that those desires are misaligned, there will be some form of suffering. Either person one gets what they want and they're suffering for person two, or vice versa, or they both compromise and both suffer a little bit. So Barry comes to realize that suffering and evil are inevitable consequences of reality itself. And instead of trying to prevent each individual instance of evil, regardless of the unintended downstream consequences, rather he aims for the amount of suffering that will result in the least amount of evil and the most amount of good, which I think is essentially the answer to the problem of evil when it comes to us as humans relating to God. Why does he allow our parents to die? Why does he allow us to undergo certain hardships or torture? And the answer is because the events he allows, given that he knows the implications of all events, and given that he is all good, he only allows those which will result in the least amount of suffering, the least amount of evil, but the most amount of good. All this results in two major Stoic ideas that will help you and your kids grow in wisdom and in virtue. The first is memento mori, which means to remember your death. Remember that you're going to die. Remember that everybody around you is going to die. And let this drive your actions. How am I going to respond to everybody around me? How am I going to show them love and generosity and care? Because I may never see them again. They may never see me again. This also means we should prepare for our own death. We should get right with God. And the only way to do that is through Christ the Redeemer. And once you have that peace with God through the forgiveness of our sins, then we can face death with courage. The second major Stoic idea is premeditatio malorum, means to premeditate on suffering, premeditate on all the bad stuff that can happen to you in life, and realize that there is a purpose and a goal of those things. Barry realizes that he and Bruce suffered the loss of their parents because that's what formed them into the heroes they became. And remember, in the previous movie, they saved literally the entire human race. They saved the entire universe. Ostensibly, God would have allowed the loss of their parents in order to create the very people that would then save billions of other people. So by premeditating on all that you will suffer later in life, you're able to emotionally reconcile with them in the presence of God and say, all right, Lord, I know that I'm going to come across moments in time that will be essentially unbearable for me, but I know that you would only allow them because there is some greater justifying good that will result from them having occurred. That's it for today. My name is Ryan Martin, and this is Unsafe Media. If you disagree with anything I said, please comment in excruciating detail down below. And if you haven't joined my Patreon yet, you're probably also the kind of person who still thinks that Marvel makes good movies. So join the Patreon, like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, trust God and keep your powder dry.